Welcome to today's Changemakers Forward event, Trust and Integrity in Global Transformation. This is, if you've been with us before, this is a little bit of a special event because we've invited folks from initiatives of change to join us and to discuss issues that they are exploring in an upcoming conference. And we basically invited them to, because we felt like this is a really important issue if we're talking about what makes effective change makers. If we're thinking about, like, what is the personal stance that you need in order to do good work, and how can you foster trust and integrity in yourself, but also in others you work with. So we're very happy to have them with us today.
We have a webinar.
We're also very happy to introduce people who haven't been at Changemakers Forward before to join us for the first time in this event. If you haven't met Changemakers Forward in the past, we're an online community for changemakers globally, and we're pooling together to support each other on our journey, our challenges, because we believe that together in our diversity with our skills, we're stronger, and we can actually make a difference. So, welcome everybody. I'm seeing about 10 people who are already with us in the chat. So, what you see is we have a few people who are with us here in the Hangout directly. And we have a few people who are watching this event on the Changemakers Forward website. In both cases, I do encourage you to open the chat window on Changemakers Forward, and let me just give you the link to that. So on this slide, you have a link to that's like bit.ly/Changemakers chat, and we'll be looking at that throughout the event, so that even if you're currently not speaking, you have issues with your microphone, you have a chance to make yourself heard there. Yes, and because we're talking about trust and integrity today, and because you're here because this is something that means something to you. Otherwise, why would you choose to spend an hour of your beautiful afternoon with us and with this question? I would love to start with a brief check-in on the chat with the question, what does integrity mean for you? If you had to give us a sentence, what does integrity mean for you? What would you say? And maybe also let us know your location. So we've got David who's joining us from Jerusalem, Risha from Stockholm, who's saying integrity means truth, Andrea from Zurich. David is saying it's about following my own core values, and Wendy's saying following my own sense of efficacy. And Suresh is saying operating from the core of your being. I'm just noticing that we seem to have two different chats, one for the people in the Hangout and one for the people in the community. So let me just post the link to the chat in the community. So there's a lot about being aligned with who I am and what I do, into congruency, knowing what is true to us and standing for it. And it's something about, like, why is this even so difficult? If I hear these responses, shouldn't this be how we approach the world? Like, why is this even a question? So I am very happy to have two people with us who have looked at the question of trust and integrity, especially in the global economy and in global transformation, for a long time. And that is, on the one hand, Wendy Addison. This image is large. Sorry. Who is joining us this time from the UK. She's originally from South Africa. Who will be sharing with us a story about how she needed to act with integrity because her environment did not provide that. I'm really looking forward to hearing that story. And we're having with us Mike Smith, who actually wrote a book. Yes, Mike is waving. Please wave again, Mike, so that people can see you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Who actually wrote a book with the title "Trust and Integrity in the Global Economy," which collects stories of how people have brought this world about. And we have Rishab with us from Stockholm. We can even see Rishab and Tatiana from Sweden. There we go. Who talk a little bit about the conference that's coming up about trust and integrity in the global economy. And yeah, that's about what our plan is for today. We have about an hour, so wherever you are in whatever time zone, we'll try to be done at the top of the hour. That's 5 o'clock Central European time, which is where I am, but wherever you are, you need to make your own transition. And with that, I would love to start and introduce Wendy to you. Let me just stop the presentation. There we go. Hello, Wendy.
Hello, everybody.
And Wendy, you already wrote in the chat that for you, integrity is about trusting your own sense of efficacy. What does that mean?
I think if we look at the language around a word that begins with IN, like incapacity or insight, it suggests it's going within ourselves and trusting what's within ourselves. And I think it was, Suresh chimed with that and saying operating from the core sense of your being. And that very much resonates with me. It's about going within, trusting within, and acting on that trusting of oneself. And so integrity is one of those words that prompts all of us to go within ourselves and to really get to grips with who we are in any given context.
Mm. Why is integrity so important for you? Where does that come in your story?
You know, I always felt that my story began as a whistleblower in the year 2000, but really on looking at my life story and extending it beyond my adult life, I feel and sense that it goes right back to my childhood, where one of my parents cheated on the other parent. And as a child of 10 years old, I witnessed something that shattered my own sense of trust in individuals that on a very innate level I had put my trust and faith in. So I became a survivor, really, and I began to, even at the age of 10, began the process of integrity, of really going within myself and understanding how I could trust myself beyond any other measures within the given situation. So my story really starts at the age of 10 years old. And, you know, if I look back on that experience and how it enabled me to be robust enough and trusting enough as an adult to utilize my own integrity in a situation that was very corrupt, very dangerous in the South African context, and against the will of the group and the system that I was in. My own integrity guided me forward to take action.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really is a lifelong story.
What did it take for you to speak up against corruption at the time?
You know, it's hard.
Yes.
You know, this is not an innate skill that we have. It goes against our evolutionary biology to want to speak out against our peer group and our systems, because we're social animals, and you know, I think our evolutionary biology is behind the 21st century in some senses. So when I was met with malfeasance within the corporation I worked in, it took me a long time to really work through the moral dilemmas that I was confronted with. But you know, like any situation, there's never just one big bang. There's normally a sliding scale of unethical lapses. So in the scenario that I found myself in, I'd been in this company for 9 years, and over that 9 years, there were a number of small ethical lapses. The culture of the organization was really led through a maverick malfeasance culture. That was the culture, and it was a very sort of tournament kind of gung-ho, shoot from the hip cowboy kind of style of managing individuals within the organization. So we'd all learned pretty well early on in our employee status that it wasn't safe to speak out, and it wasn't very helpful, and in fact, why should anyone bother anyway? So there were two things going on for me when I was confronted with this huge ethical lapse. It was no longer pinching money from the petty cash or putting through the company's the company's director's son's cars through the company accounts. This was embezzling hundreds of millions out of a public listed company into private bank accounts in Jersey. And you know, these things are complicated because these two individuals were not only my colleagues, they were my friends. And the narrative that went on in my own head was this: do I just consider my own career? Do I just consider that I may lose my livelihood here? Do I just think about my employment contract with my employers? Or do I stretch myself and imagine the damage done to a wider set of the population? So, you know, I know now that's called pro-social thinking, but at the time, it was just a matter of stretching and extending my thinking process beyond the confines of my employment contract into my social contract with everybody else. And
so really, this moment to realize that it's not just about you, it's about a bigger system, and actually wanting to take responsibility for that.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, there's been a lot of research that says people that have had challenging events in their childhoods often are very altruistic in their thinking. And I think that does apply to me, and quite a few whistleblowers I've spoken to as well. There's a sense of wanting to be of service to others beyond ourselves. So that gave me the impetus to be able to speak out. That acknowledgement that we are all interconnected, and that by not doing anything, I was making salient that it was okay to be corrupt. And I was approving transactions that were clearly going to impact everybody and the country itself. and the society. And the second thing that gave me permission to speak out was that I was the only female on the executive team. And whilst people often utilize that difference or the fact that they feel like an outlier, they justify that as reasons for not speaking out. I used it as a reason to speak out because I felt that I was already outside the group as a female, and it had given me then therefore permission to remain in that context and use my voice effectively. So there were those two things going on for me.
You were referring to like the wider movement of whistleblowers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do whistleblowers connect? What support could I get if I'm considering to speak up against something?
In my experience of whistleblowers,
yeah,
whistleblowing and what happens after whistleblowing,
yes,
is a big problem that we need to work on as a society.
Yes.
But it's about understanding the human condition and what we are as social animals and why we do the things we do. And it's about starting from that awareness and that mindfulness and then working with behavioral interrupters to take us beyond that. So it's like if you're lost in a shopping mall or lost in the local woods and you find the map out of the woods, it doesn't say you want to be here, it says you are here. So I think with any kind of narrative around a challenging area like whistleblowing or speaking out or interrupting behaviors, we have to start with where we are now. What are we as a human species? Has this been helpful to us? Do we need to move beyond our behaviors and our situation right now? Now, whistleblowers have demonstrated this incredible courage to speak out. However, because the society is almost lagging behind in terms of what whistleblowers are seeing and what the sort of systemic governments and communities are not seeing. So therefore, there's a whole lot of victimization and bullying of people that do speak truth to power. And one or two things can happen. On the one hand, I've seen a lot of whistleblowers horribly damaged by this. So what we get as a society is a lot of highly professional, intelligent, altruistic, empathetic individuals fired from their positions in their communities and jobs, no livelihood, sitting at home in utter pain because they're not able to secure any kind of justice whatsoever. They're angry and they're vilified, and unfortunately, I call them in the eye of the storm. They're in the spin dryer still. So they're not able to be effective change makers in society yet, but they can if we help them. Other whistleblowers, and I put myself in this category, I secured justice. So it did take me 11 years, but I secured justice. And that 11 years, but it's allowed me to move beyond my situation and not to come from victimhood anymore, but to come from more of a sort of moral defier role rather than the sort of deviant victim kind of frame that people project on whistleblowers. Now, the moral defier gives me that impetus to help others. But whistleblowers need a whole lot of help emotionally and mentally after blowing the whistle. Because the intention is never to sort of become a whistleblower. The intention is to just do the right thing.
Yeah, so one of the things that strikes me here is that there are like two sides to the story, and I'd also love to hear some thoughts from everybody else about what resonates and what questions you have for Wendy. But what strikes me is that there are two sides of the story. So on the one hand, you've got this like systemic something's not quite right, and at one point you reach the tip of the iceberg, and then someone steps up and becomes a whistleblower. So there's this question of like, what can we as in our systems do so that actually it doesn't come to this tip of the iceberg, but that we can actually work on the systemic injustices that happen every day, that aren't so bad that that really we actually need to address. And then on the other hand, when someone steps up and has the courage to expose a wrong in government, society, business, wherever, that there's a real responsibility for us to support those people, because it's damn hard and they have just made a whole bunch of enemies.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I advocate. I don't advocate for whistleblowing because I've been there, done that. Lost the T-shirt, got a different T-shirt. I've got a whole wardrobe of different T-shirts now. but I don't advocate it because the legislation doesn't protect whistleblowers. But I also believe that we can change this this sort of situation by having candid, courageous conversations ahead of whistleblowing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we need to understand the social psychologies that we have in our evolutionary parts of ourselves and our brain is preventing us from doing that. We need to develop the practiced muscles to be able to have these candid conversations. And it takes a lot of courage, but you know, I've just been to San Francisco and studied with a group of people on what's called social fitness training. And it literally is building the courageous conversation muscle so that it becomes a social norm where people are having these very difficult conversations, both from a person that's speaking out, but also we need to acknowledge that the leaderships, the people in power that we're speaking to, also have a very, very difficult time in hearing the bad news and acting on that bad news, because we've been brought up in a society and a system where we only want to hear the good news. We only want to focus on what's great and celebratory about things. But the bad news is how bad news often shapes the way we react to things. But from a social psychology point of view, leaders have a very difficult time listening and hearing and acting on bad news because it actually it hits their hot buttons of maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe my own self-efficacy is coming into question, and therefore I need to react in a defensive way. So again, both the person hearing and acting and the person speaking, this is a very practiced, scripted way that we can promote courageous conversations.
Yeah, I love how this is going into kind of this daily practice of having courageous conversations, and I feel like there's a whole there's a whole well of depth and knowledge on how we can do that. But I'd love to come back to some of the other people who've been listening to us. Fabiola, Rishabh, Mike, Sora, Suresh, or maybe also if you're watching on the community and are in the chat, please just type your question. Maybe one of the people who are here in the Hangout want to jump in. Mike.
Well, could I just say, Webke, a real appreciation for Wendy, because I think she really is the epitome of resilience in the human spirit. And I think this is what is needed inside organizations. I think this is the value of this word integrity. It actually builds resilience inside organizations because you're able to manage the reputation of your organization if you have that resilience and that commitment to integrity. And it is a leadership issue. It's set by the tone at the top of organizations. And it obviously wasn't there in the organization that you work for, Wendy, and so you had to blow the whistle. And I think whistleblowers are people who really do love their organizations. They want their organizations to be at their best. And then you get very frustrated when they're not. And certainly other whistleblowers I've talked to about this have felt the same, that actually whistleblowers really need to be honored in society. But I think it does come back to the resilience of organizations, that the integrity, the way organizations operate, that is built, that builds the resilience and the reputation of organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also have Vilma here who's saying that she followed Wendy's story in South Africa when he was in great danger. Other people were destroyed when they tried to alert authorities to fraud. I think you've spoken very little about what actually happened in these 11 years and what you had to put up with, but chapeau.
Thank you.
And I'm delighted to say that Wendy is going to tell her story at the Trust and Integrity Conference that is coming up in Caux, Switzerland, 26th of June to the 1st of July. And you mentioned, Webke, about my book, Trust and Integrity, but I've also written a new book, which is called Great Company. And I've told Wendy's story in some detail in the book that we're going to launch at that conference at the end of this month, at the end of June.
Great. Okay, I will keep taking questions in the chat, and I'll pass them on. But actually, Mike, you've just given me a really beautiful segue, because you're saying that your work has basically been to look into this question of what's the importance of integrity. You've spoken to a bunch of whistleblowers. Where does this inquiry come from for you? Like, why this question?
It's a good question. I come from a business family background. My father was a textile businessman in Bradford, in Yorkshire, in the north of England, a woolen textile business founded by my great-great-great-grandfather. And they at one time were manufacturing the highest quality manufactured wool anywhere in the world. But Wendy talked about having this moment, I think when you said at the age of 12.
Yeah.
For me, I had a transformative moment at the age of 19 when I decided with a friend and a colleague of mine to really to live my life on the basis of being true to my conscience and not according to my convenience. And this really set the tone for the way I was going to live my life. It meant putting certain things right in my relationships, but I've tried to follow this, being true to one's core values, to one's sense of consciousness and conscience, ever since, for almost now getting on for 50 years. And I've tried to, if you like, follow the path of enlightenment, to be true to the inner voice, the still small voice within, whatever you like to call it. And I think this has set the tone for my life. And then I've wanted to see, well, okay, but how does this apply in the business and the economy context? Mm-hmm. And it really has been extraordinary to mine out these stories, many of which have been told at the Trust and Integrity conferences in Caux in Switzerland since the crash of 2008, but many other stories too. And
so tell me a little. What kind of people have you spoken to, and what did they have in common?
I've spoken to bankers. I've spoken to entrepreneurs. I've spoken to business leaders. I've spoken to social entrepreneurs, to community activists, and I think all of them. What they've had in common is their sense of contribution to the common good. So in other words, they've moved from acquisition to contribution, and a sense that the organizations that they work for have a much bigger purpose than just the profit motive. And goodness me, we've seen terrible downside of the acquisition spirit, the profit motive, the sense of greed that led to the crash of 2008. But all the stories that I tell, and the stories that have been told in Switzerland and also at our conferences in India over the years, are ones of organizations that have had a very strong sense of their social role and sense of social contribution. I think that's a real hallmark of what is the role of business in the economy towards the common good. And I just tried to illustrate that with storytelling.
Yeah. So could you give me an example of one that has recently inspired you?
Well, I think one of the stories that really inspired me, that I tell right at the very beginning of the book, is this wonderful interaction between Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General, and a man called Lawrence Bloom, who is an international hotelier. This took place in Caux in Switzerland in 2013. And Lawrence Bloom, he told his story of how he'd made a huge amount of wealth in the commercial property market in the City of London by his early 30s. He'd got his 7-bedroom mansion in Hampstead Heath. He'd got his Mercedes car parked outside, and he said to himself, "Is this it? Is this everything that I've been dreamed of?" And he said, "I had a deep sense of dissatisfaction." And he said, "I still felt a great deal of fear." He'd made an awful lot of money, but he was very afraid that he was going to lose it. So he said, "I went on a 3-year binge drinking spree." Then he pulled himself together, and then he said, "Well, I realized I wasn't nurturing my soul." And with that thought in mind, he then joined the board of Intercontinental Hotels. And he set the standard for environmental policy in the hotel industry worldwide. He was in charge of their $3 billion real estate portfolio. And he wrote their environmental manual.
Yeah.
And one of the just a few paragraphs in their environmental manual tells this idea that has now become standard practice in hotel business worldwide, is that to offer hotel guests the option of having a clean towel every night or not having a clean towel every night. And this has revolutionized hotel practice, now standard practice in 5 million hotel bedrooms worldwide. But it's had a huge impact on the environmental impact of the global hotel industry.
Yeah.
So I think this story rather impressed Kofi Annan, actually.
Well, and it's interesting to see kind of the different paths to enlightenment that people take. Sometimes it's a three-year long binge drinking spree that will do the job. So I'm thinking that, of course, I mean, there are always these great stories of business for social good where it's actually the social conscience, the bigger purpose actually feeds the bottom line, and it's all beautiful, and it's a thriving business. But I mean, as you've spoken with many people, what are their challenges in making this happen?
Well, I think it is an issue of leadership. I think it's an issue of a new models of ownership in business too. I mean, if you look at the Tata Corporation, for instance, 60% owned by its trusts, so it can never be taken over. Had very fine leadership right from the very beginning. The founder of Tata Corporation said, you know, the customer is the reason for our existence. So the sense of service to the customer, the service to the community. I also quote in my book Paul Polman, the chief executive of Unilever, and he was the guest of honor at the graduation ceremony of Business School Lausanne last September. And he said to all the graduating business students there, you know, he said there are 100 million people who go to bed at night hungry in the world. And up in a world that you, as you go out into the world, will have to deal with these issues. And of course, a company like Unilever itself is, you know, one of the biggest food companies in the world, also has to look, well, you know, what is their social, what do they contribute to society? So it's a question of leadership, the question of the tone at the top, and I think it's also a question of new models of ownership. B corporations, benefit corporations, are become much more prevalent, if you like. Grew up in California, where they are mandated in the way they are structured to serve all the stakeholders and not just the shareholders, and they can be audited as such. So that's and of course the whole rise of the social entrepreneurship movement in the world, which is growing and growing, and in fair trade companies too.
Yeah.
So there are different models that need to be looked at. But at the core of all this is the human motivation. And that sense of what is our contribution to society to make this world a better place to live in.
It seems to me that like one of the core questions here really is, yes, you are breaking up a little, and I'm just looking at everybody else how the audio quality is, but it seems to be okay. Apart from you, okay. So it seems to be that one of the key questions is how do I actually build this culture of trust, this culture of integrity across the organization? Like, how do I take people along? Because not everybody, I mean, people come from a classic business school backgrounds. They're used to the focus on profit, and how can I actually build a culture where it's different? And how can I also build that culture in a way that it sustains beyond the reign of one executive? So you were giving this example of Tata. I think Unilever also has to ask themselves this question. So yes.
I mean, I think the business schools have a huge role in this as well, and what they actually teach to students. So it's not just pre-IT.
Yes. There's also a question from Rishabh and David in the chat, Rishabh is asking whether you could give an example of how you have lived according to your conscience, and David is asking how those inner values for you have changed throughout the years.
Addressing this too.
I'm addressing this question to you because that.
I'm not sure that the values have changed.
Mm-hmm. The priorities?
Yes. My sense of journey in life has changed. The sense of a widening sense of what is my contribution. I was hugely impacted by Professor Raj Mohan Gandhi, who was one of the grandsons of Mahatma Gandhi. He brought a theatre troupe to Europe in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And I never dreamt at that time that I would have a long-term involvement in India. And of course, once you've lived in an emerging market economy, developing economy, your whole perspectives on life change. And Rishabh, of course, will understand exactly what I'm talking about because he comes from New Delhi. But you know, to see a country like India becoming a global player in the last decades has been extraordinary. But Raj Mohan Gandhi said that, you know, this was a good 40 years ago. He said, can you come and help us in India to develop our democracy, our economy under a democratic system at a time when China is doing the same thing under a totalitarian system? And I was hugely inspired by this. And I said, wow, you know, get me on the next flight. And eventually I went for 1 year and I stayed for 3 years. And that was a big education for me and made friends for life there. So the values, I think, that Initiatives of Change has propounded over the years have not really changed, but the context changes.
Yeah.
And the state of the world changes. So you have to rethink, what are the issues that we need to address in the world nowadays? And of course, one of the big issues is what is the values in financial services since the crash of 2008, and that is a whole other ballgame.
Do you see things changing? Oh, I can now hear you talk. I can see you talk, but I can't hear you talk. So you need to repeat. Okay.
You can hear me.
Yeah. Just repeat the last sentence.
Things are changing and things are staying the same. It's a little bit of both. The banks are still, they are still cheating on the interest rate. There's the prosecution going on in London right now with a trader who was trying to manipulate the LIBOR, the key interest rate for LIBOR, London Interbank Offered Rate. And banks have been fined hugely for their manipulation of the foreign exchange markets. So I think, again, how do you get banks to think about what is their contribution, what is their role in society, what is their sense of stewardship? And there are some great banks in them, some really banks that have really been sinners, if you like.
Yeah. Right.
It's an ongoing issue.
Yes. So the big challenges for us. How do we foster? How do we strengthen trust and integrity in this big system? And how do we also think about not just our own role, but not just our own interests, but about the interests of the whole, and have courageous conversations. I would love to just briefly go back to everybody in the room and ask the question in the story that you heard from Wendy as a whistleblower in South Africa, from the story of Mike on his exploration of trust and integrity in global business. What insights resonate with you, and what questions do you still have? What insights resonate with you? What questions do you still have? Just give you a moment or two to think about this and write in the chat. Yes. So let me just read a few of the things that are coming in. So Sharp writing, it's he'll take away the inspiration from the courage of Wendy to stand up for what's right and not who's right. Andrea says she will follow more and more her core values. Viola says when it's about a bigger purpose, we can overcome fear and stand up with courage. Mike's courage to follow Raj Mohan Gandhi and commit 3 years of his youth to a large vision. Yes, Marco, great question. How do you practice integrity when the systemic forces around you are pushing towards complacency? And I think that's what we all struggle with when we're looking at bigger systems and taking responsibility. Love to hear your thoughts on this. And then Suresh in another window is asking whether there's a thorough diligence taken to cross-verify facts before pinning down the group of persons in a whistleblowing process. So I'm wondering, Wendy, Mike, or maybe anybody else, whether you have thoughts on the question that Marco poses. What helps you to practice integrity when the overall system is basically moving towards keeping your mouth shut and staying complacent? And what helps you to encourage others to practice integrity?
Yeah, one of the things that remind me to continue on this quite difficult, challenging pathway of coming from integrity is when I get to speak to an audience. Most times I have individuals approaching me, both men and women, often very privately, and they then share a story where they were in a situation where they observed wrongdoing. And it doesn't have to be an unethical malfeasance. It could be bullying, it could be sexual abuse, domestic abuse, prejudice, racial discrimination. And they've been a bystander or an observer of this conduct, and they have said nothing. And this stays with them forever. And when they share this with me, for me it's a very clearly emotional situation they are reliving, and they end the conversation by saying, "I wish I had had the courage to have said something." Now, I don't like to use the word conclusion because we're always in this sort of revolving state, but my sense is that it really emboldens me to continue on this journey of having your courage and not being fearful, and trusting yourself to do what is necessary, because having done battle with fear, I know it's a better battle than having to do battle with shame and guilt, which is what I'm seeing in the faces of people that are sharing their stories with me. That, the fact that they weren't able to speak out leaves them with this residue of shame and guilt and regret. And that is a far worse emotion. Those are far worse damaging emotions than fear, because fear can often spur you on, whereas shame, guilt, and regret just keep you stuck and trapped within a contextual emotional state. So for me, it re-emboldens me. It re-emboldens me to carry on. It's not easy, but I also know, and I knew this before I set out on this journey, that anything worthwhile is going to be tough. And it's important for all of us to remember to look at life through the historic lens that's gone before us and say, you know what, we can actually roll a stone forward, even if people say it's stuck to the ground. And we also need to look through our lives and the lives of our world and our social system through the long-term lens as well, which helps us get past the fear, the immediate knee-jerk reaction of fear.
Great. Thank you. Mike, some short thoughts on this?
Well, I come back to the word resilience again, and I like the word that Wendy has just used of courage.
Yeah.
And for me, I think what gives me resilience and courage is the practice of taking time out each day for some silent reflection, where I can really, if you like, turn the searchlight inwards to find the inner sources of strength, the spiritual wisdoms of the different faith traditions, and to reject the wrong in my human nature, and to encourage the good in my human nature. And we all have that choice to make, and it's a daily choice.
Yes.
But if you make it a daily choice and you practice it daily, it becomes part of your makeup, part of your practice. So for me, I think having silent reflection every day is a core. It's an anchor, and it's a springboard to action. And I always do it first thing in the morning, because you always start the day afresh. You might as well do it before the phone starts ringing and before all your emails, and then you're set up for the rest of the day and for the rest of your life. And you know, it's transformative. So,
you know. and it takes coming back to it over and over and over again.
It does, yes, absolutely. But you know, there's a wonderful book that I do, as well as my own books, which I can happily plug like anything. There's another book I've just read by called The Road to Character, and you can get hold of it on Amazon, by David Brooks. He's a New York Times columnist, very highly regarded, and absolutely wonderful evaluation of the impact of people of real character, their decision making in their lives, from human rights activists in the United States to General Eisenhower to all sorts of people from different backgrounds. But he has some wonderful conclusions. So right. I think the building of character is, you know, this time, taking time out for this daily reflection, is also what builds our character, builds our courage, builds our resilience.
Right. Thank you. I'm noticing that we're coming to the end of this call, and I don't want to end this call without giving Rishabh a moment to talk about why he's organizing a conference on the topic of trust and integrity in the global economy, and what conversations will happen there. Rishabh, let me just put up the website so that we can see it. Where do I have it? It's here. And then the microphone is all yours. We even have
thank you, Ritke, and thank you, Fabiola, for this wonderful opportunity for allowing Mike and Wendy to share the story. And I think it was just a tiny glimpse of what is ahead from June 26th to the 1st of July, and it's not just me who's organizing it. It's also Tatiana Sokolova, Mike Smith, who was speaking here, and many others from around the world who have been coming together for many years to actually explore this question of what is trust, what is integrity, and which are the business models, economic models, but also human stories of change, of struggle, of people who are trying to basically make those daily decisions and to walk the path of what is right and not who is right. And you know, the conference has different elements to it. I think the two main elements to it is the fact that we are having stories like Wendy's story, which really explore the inner process of personal change, and the of it is the structures and systems, where there will be workshops on how we can build these to create new business models, new economic models, which help us to be congruent with our values. So that's a little bit about the conference. It's about a week, so it really gives people the time to reflect and slow down. But it also is in a beautiful location of Caux Mountain House, which has the heritage of reconciling many of the Germans and the French after the Second World War, and heritage of having many famous businessmen like the Rockefellers or the Phillips or many others who have found inspiration in that space. And Wipke, you've been there,
Yes.
so maybe you should say a bit more about it.
Well,
so yeah, log on to trustintegrity.org now and register for the conference. And hope to see you.
Yeah. Yes. So at one point we did call the house in Caux the Hogwarts for Changemakers, and I think really, as you were saying, what I appreciate about what you guys are doing is really that you're linking, on the one hand, the personal integrity and personal practice with the stories, and then the big picture of why we're doing this and what the overall framework is. So it's not just the talking heads at the front. There's this real concept and community behind that. So if you don't have any other plans at the end of June, I do recommend it. I thought this was a really fascinating conversation with all of you around, and I'd like so many things I would love to get into more detail than we can do in about an hour. The chat will stay open for another hour or two, so if you have comments that you would like to give us and feedback, please do. Otherwise, I will say thank you to Mike and Wendy and Rishab and everybody who joined us. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on the community or in Caux.
Well, thank you, Weke, and thank you, Fabiola, for arranging this. Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the platform.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Juan.